Hi, I'm Riccardo, or as the title of the channel says, as of 2021, Lord in Chertum. Until a few months ago, I was doing gameplay videos about me being salty and getting my ass kicked in a few games.
Oh, fuck's sake.
Was sind?
È in bagno, è in bagno, è in bagno, è in bagno. Ha chiuso la porta.
Hello there, mister.
However, as early videos show, I always like to try new things. I always try to enter the world of essay videos. Now, I'm no historian, nor I'm probably the best qualified to talk about these topics, but I did try to make a good amount of research while writing the scripts. Of course, feel free to correct me or bash me in the head if it wasn't accurate, or took an awful stance during the video. I hope you will enjoy and get to learn something that, at least in my experience in the Italian education system, is usually not taught in school. Today we will talk about the Toyota War. Now, the Toyota War was not actually a conflict on its own, but the final one in Syria started all the way back in 1978, and part of a bigger civil war started in 1965 and ended in 1996. The two major parties of the conflict were Chad and Libya. One, a former colony that already tested itself around the harsh condition of warfare, massively harmed and in search of a role as a power and as a representative of Pan-Arabism. The other, a former colony much younger, divided by different clashing population, in need of a stable government and with an army barely capable of being called such. A conflict rooted in a colonial agreement dating back to 1930s. And that led to a war situation that one already present with thousands of lives lost. A conflict that prompted two different nations on two different styles of warfare. Nevertheless, what came of it? Did it change how warfare is fought? On one hand, we have Libya, formerly an Ottoman territory invaded by Italy in 1911. Initially, it was formed by two colonies, Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. In 1937, the two colonies were merged into one, forming Libya. The occupation wasn't really a peaceful one, with various conflicts between Italian colonial authorities and Bedouins in the most southern parts of the colony. The colony remained under Italian rule until 1943, when the Allied troops occupied the region following the defeat at the Second Battle of El Alamein and Operation Torch in 1942. After World War II, in 1947, Italy renounced any claim on the region, with the British occupying it until 1951, when it achieved independence as a kingdom under the rule of, forgive my pronunciation, Said Amr Muhammad Idris. In 1961, a group of army officers, led by Muammar al-Gaddafi, supporters of the Nasser's ideology of Pan-Arabism, overthrew the monarchy. In 1973, Egypt and Syria attacked by surprise Israel, starting the October War. The preparation of the attack was planned in secret, and Libya was never informed of it until the day of the attack. Citing Kenneth and Pollack in his Arab at War, Military Effectiveness, after the October War, Libya embarked on an arms buying spree that dwarfed its pre-1973 build-up. Libya's military expansion had aimed to create, in the word of Wayne Dyer, modern, well-balanced forces of a size that Libya could reasonably expect to operate with its limited resources of skilled manpower. Although, even then, there were severe shortages of pilots and skilled technicians. After 1973, Libya's build-up far outstripped the ability of its population or its armed forces to handle such weapons. After 1973, relations between Libya and Egypt started to become harsher, especially after the cooling of relations between Syria, Egypt and Israel, leading to Libya being isolated by its neighbors and nearly starting a conflict with Egypt between 1976 and 1977. On the other hand, Chad. Chad has always been a point of encounter and exchange between Northern and Central Africa, tracing routes as a commercial hub since the Middle Ages, and some records stating that it was such even before those times. The region had been claimed as a colony by France in 1891 and in 1960 achieved its independence without any need for conflicts. While the region presented a long history of cultural exchange, it has never seen a development of local ruling, being always under the control of foreign powers. As stated by Azevedo M.J. in Roots of Violence, A History of War in Chad, the effort of today's Chad continues to be an attempt to reconcile ancient differences and peoples who were artificially forged into a nation by France, and said differences emerged soon in Chad's history. By 1965, the nation found itself in a civil war between the Muslim North and the Christian animistic South, and it is here that the two nations started, with Libya supporting the northern rebels by 1966, pushing a campaign of irredentism. In fact, in 1935, following the Mussolini-Laval agreements, France ceded the Strip of Azov to the Italian Libya, but since the international agreement is not valid until ratification, France never ratified the agreement, meaning that following World War II the Strip returned to Chad, further dividing the population of nomads from Libya that in the years entered the Strip. The conflict started initially as a series of aids of Libya to the northern militias. This led to the unstable government of Chad recovering from a recent attempt of coup in 1971, allowing Libya to occupy the Strip of Azov in 1972 in exchange for an ending of support of the northern rebels. The accord, however, led the government to be deposed by a military junta in 1975 that did not accept the surrender to the Libyan threats. In response, Gaddafi restarted aiding North rebels, and in 1976, Gaddafi himself claimed that Libya would completely annex the Strip. The announcement was followed by further movements of Libyan troops in the Strip, leading to more and more border conflicts between Chadian troops and Libyans. In 1978, the insurgent Foreigner Group was armed enough to be considered a conventional army, and thanks to the Libyan aids, they were capable of further advancement in the country. Also, when they turned south, Libyan troops joined in. 2,500 insurgents, aided by 4,000 Libyan soldiers, easily defeated an army garrison of 5,000 Chadian soldiers that found themselves overwhelmed by Libyan tanks and airstrikes. The sudden attack led Chad to request help from France, which agreed to dispatch 1,000 soldiers and 20 fighters jets to aid in the war. Suddenly, the tide turned, with Chad possessing air superiority due to the Libyan MiG being outmaneuvered. By late 1978, deal between the insurgents and Chad was starting to be made, leaving Libya in the cold and forcing them to abandon further operations. By 1979, a deal seemed to be found with the formation of a government of national unity. However, none of the group forming the new government supported Libyan claims of the Strip of Azov. Thus, in November 1979, Gaddafi ordered the invasion of North and Central Chad. The second invasion was met by a United Chadian Front, rejecting the invasion by August 1979. Eager to regain control over the lost Strip, Libya attacked once again in August 1980. With a regular army of 7,000 regular soldiers supported by 300 T-55s and several batteries of BM-21 rocket artillery, backed by much of the Libyan Air Force. Wary of another French intervention, the Libyan troops brought a massive amount of anti-air guns. The new Chadian government was caught by surprise while trying to reorganize the country with an army of only 4,000 men with no aircraft or tanks. By the 8th of December, the capital of Chad had been conquered. The, at the time, current leader of Chad was led to Tripoli and nearly at gunpoint forced into accepting merging of Libya and Chad. The Organization of African Unity met the announcement with disdain. Afraid of a reaction by the OAF, Organization of African Unity, and following a clash of Chadian and Libyan troops, Gaddafi announced in 1981 that the merger would not happen, and withdraw all Libyan troops from Chad into the Azov Strip, leaving a pro-Libyan government in charge. Issa and Habre fled to Sudan, alongside various troops. Habre and his soldiers regrouped and organized in Sudan, backed by financial and military aid of Egypt, France, Sudan, and the United States, and by 1982 reconquered Chad, deposing the government. Libya, burned out by the previous years of war, allowed the invasion with no intervention. In April 1983, a new attack started, with Libya trying to minimize the number of units in the conflict this time. However, strong resistance met the attack, and by the 13th of July threatened to advance on the Azov Strip. In August 1983, 11,000 Libyan troops left the Strip of Azov to attack Chad once more, forcing Habr's troops to retreat. However, the Libyan army wasn't able to catch up with Hader's troops, allowing it to escape and reorganize. During the reorganization period, he acquired French support, much like his predecessors, achieving and conquering major towns and cities such as Chaluba and Faya. The Libyan countered the advance by using white phosphorus and napalm on the two cities. Haber attempted another advance, but France refused to give air support. The Chadians attempted to make up by hiring 2,000 Syrian soldiers, but their effectiveness lacked the cohesion that the tired Chadian troops demonstrated, grinding their advance to a halt. Seeing the stalemate, France intervened diplomatically, proposing a retreat of both Libyans and French troops from Chad. Libya agreed, but kept 6,000 troops hidden in the north of the country. French troops claimed that the Libyans did completely withdraw, but by December 1984, the Libyan offensive restarted, slowly advancing, mostly building up until mid-1985, attempting not to spark another French intervention. We finally reached the final chapter in Chad and Libyan conflict, the famously called Toyota War. At this point, you should know that during the entire conflict, Gaddafi's regime suffered various coups. In 1979, 1980, 1981, 1983, 1984, and in 1985. In response, Gaddafi had disjointed the military from the intelligence and had executed more than 100 people. This led to various eccentricities within the command structure that made it hard to maneuver troops or various officials of whom Gaddafi had no trust, diminishing Libya's ability to conduct precise operations. Not only that, but during the 1980s, the United States had started changing their attitude towards Libya, growing more and more annoyed and starting to give more and more support to Haber's soldiers in Chad. Thus, both France and the United States were offering training, weaponry, intelligence and monetary aid to Haber's troops. Haber found that tanks and heavy artillery, which would have been impossible to handle for the poorly trained militias, would only hinder them, requesting instead light trucks and pickups on which to mount heavy weaponry, allowing them to be fast and nimble against a Libyan more slow and heavy approach. Moreover, the Toyota Hilux and Land Cruiser proved extremely capable in this regard. Alongside the AA guns mounted on the trucks, the various soldiers-mounted anti-air system was deployed, allowing the fast infantry to defend themselves from the Libyan Air Force. Haber also used the entire conflict to select capable commanders that would allow him to focus on logistics and diplomacy. Between some of these commanders, Hassan Jamous in particular proved to be an outstanding commander, practicing maneuver warfare with a skill that led several Western observers to compare him to Hervé Rommel. This shocked Libya's high command, suddenly stopped by a Chad counterattack without any French air support or any other nation's direct military support. At the beginning of February, Libya mounted up a large-scale attack over 3 targets: Kuba Olonga, Calais and Chaluba. All the targets were met with heavy resistance and heavy casualties, but by the end of the operations, Chaluba and Calais were taken. However, a faster counterattack allowed the Chadian troops to regain control over both towns on the 13th of February. The coastal attack was so hard on the Libyans that the troops were forced to flee back to the Azov Strip. This convinced the French Air Force to restart supporting the Chadian troops by starting various airstrikes against Libyan air bases in Chadian territory. The French support prompted the Libyan troops to call off the invasion and retreat further north. Gaddafi ordered to resupply even more troops and more modern weaponry to the front, completely ignoring that it wasn't the number of troops in Chad the problem, but rather the capacity of Chadians to counter the heavy Libyan units with faster and more organized troops with better access to intelligence. In fact, many Frolinat troops had fled the Libyan-supported army, and thus Libya lost their advantages regarding intelligence on the area, leading the Libyan soldiers with no experience on the geography of the territory, having to scout and gather information, thus intelligence, by themselves. After passing the harsh mountains of the Tibesti, on which the heavy defense of the Libyan army proved capable, the Chilean troops reached and conquered Fada, from which they stopped and reorganized for their advance in the desert. In 1987, Wadi Doum, an important center to resupply Libyan troops in northern Chad, became the victim of airstrikes and hit-and-run attacks. Finally, the Libyans decided to counter by attacking Fada. They had taken the bait. On the 18th of March, Libyan troops were led into an ambush and surrounded, leaving a gap in the Libyan defenses, too slow and clumsy to be able to counter the Chadian attack. On the 22nd of March, Jammus attacked. The Libyan knew of the attack and had prepared many defenses, but it wasn't enough to stop the Chadian attack from achieving victory between the panicking Libyan troops. After 4 hours, the battle was over and the Chadian had won. The loss of Wadi Doum meant that it would be impossible to resupply many smaller Libyan bases in the northern Chad, meaning that not only they had been pushed out of the center of the country, but were being pushed to their last lines of defense. In the late 1987, the battle for the Azov Strip had begun, and the Chadian troops were being successful, managing to even beat a counterattack before being forced out of the Azov on the 28th of August. In September, while the Libyan attempted another attack to regain territory in the Azov Strip, Haber sent Jammus in a mission to destroy her base in the south of Libya, 200 kilometers away from the front line. The Libyan attack was defeated, while the attack on the Libyan air bases met little resistance by the surprised Libyan troops in the bases themselves. However, luckily for Gaddafi, the Chadian raids were too successful, making France suspicious of the real intentions of Chad. France was worried, in fact, that the Chadians would attempt an offense in Libya proper, something that France didn't approve of. France thus forced Haber to agree on a ceasefire. While the French pushed for the ending of the conflict and establishing of relationship between the two countries, with the USA, the Reagan administration hoped the war would keep going in a way to dispose of Gaddafi in Libya. However, the tensions slowly cooled, and by 1988 Gaddafi recognized Haber as the de facto leader of Chad. By 1989, the two parties tried to read the question of the Strip with an agreement in Algeria, but none could come up to a solution, and in 1990 the question was brought up to the United Nations. When the conflict between Libya and Chad was over, the civil war that since 1965 was devastating Chad itself kept going, and in 1990 Gaddafi saw the opportunity to support Idris Deby to overthrow Haber's regime. Libya had become the first country in the world to recognize the new Chadian government, going as far as having a treaty of friendship between Libya and Chad. However, Deby, much like Haber, did not give up on the claim that Chad had on the Azov Strip, the claim that he was ready to take up arms once again against Libya if necessary. The Azov was given officially back to Chad in 1994 after a UN ruling. Both parties agreed on the ruling and Libya retreated its troops definitively this time, with a declaration of two parties recognizing the border of each other. The Chadian civil war finally ended by 1996, when Deby called for election and won. However, by 2003, hostilities between militias started once more, and a conflict this time with Sudan started in 2005, just to end in 2010. Today, the country, while not in a state of full civil war, still deals with a good amount of militias, especially fighting the groups of Boko Haram. And with the fall of Gaddafi's regime in 2011, new pressures on the border between the two countries has sparked, with news up to the 15th of April 2021 of Libyan militias sparking short conflicts on the border of Chad. The conflict showed the weakness of armies such as the Libyan one. The bloated Libyan army, with its massive amount of Soviet weaponry, was very capable of striking a good deal of victories when the Chadian forces had no organization and did not know what to expect of their foes. The tactics mostly consisted of overpowering the enemy with superior firepower and continued engagement by air. The true success of their operation derived from the supply lines. However, the lack of liberty of movement and intelligence made the Libyan troops only operate well in frontal assault, acting slowly. Meanwhile, the Chadian troops, once they realized the weaknesses of the enemy, aimed at doctrines of pure speed, mounting every weapon that could be useful against armored units and their forces on fast-moving tracks, good to traverse demanding terrains. Vehicles that would be easy to maintain, repair, operate, and that would be overall cheap. This not only prompted success over a slow-moving and hard-to-manage army, but also allowed them to attack deep into their enemy supply lines, cutting off of the fuel for the more advanced Libyan vehicles. This sparked a new way to fight asymmetric wars. The cheap insurgent army knows what they had to do to fight off more technologically advanced rivals. A simple truck used on a farm could become the perfect way to defeat enemy MBTs. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you found it interesting. I would like to talk more about these topics, but honestly I do not know which yet. If you enjoyed this video, leave the like, and if you subscribe I try to do more of these. I would like to add that Idris died while I was recording and editing this video in the first half. Currently Chad doesn't have a leader, or if I can recall correctly, France is aiming at having his son taking over. First of all, thanks to Wikipedia, which is a good page to start informing yourself about the topics, but first and foremost, thanks for the sources at the bottom of the articles, which in this case are Leigh Neville Technicals, non-standard tactical vehicles from the Toyota War to Modern Special Forces, Mario J. Azevedo, The Roots of Violence, A History of War and Chad, War and Society, Volume 4, Kenneth and Pollack, Arabs at War, Military Effectiveness, 1948-1991, Studies in War, Society and the Military. Lastly, for the latest news on the situation in Chad, the Observatory of International Security of the Louis University on their site Sicurezza Internazionale. Regarding the UN resolution, 2 books can be consulted, but they were at slightly prohibitive prices, thus I did reserve myself mostly to Wikipedia. Thank you for staying even though through the sources. I will list the one that were not listed here in the description. I will also list the music, video and picture sources on the description. Goodbye.